Good evening, YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. This is IMAX Sports with another football video, and today I'm going over my NFL power rankings for the 2023 NFL season for wildcard weekend or Week 19. This is my final power rankings of the season, and this was a crazy week for playoffs, the playoff picture for everything, so let's get right into it. First off, we have the dumpster fire. There were no changes in positions this week. All of the teams stayed where they were. Carolina lost their final game of the season, finishing off the season 2-15 and securing the first pick of the draft. The Commanders are at 31. They have lost 8 games in a row after having a fairly respectable start. They started off 4-5 and they finished off losing 8 games in a row. They were 2-1 at one point, but they just weren't able to get any momentum going in the second half of the season. Chargers, once they were bad with Justin Herbert, and once Justin Herbert went out, they became one of the worst teams in the league. And the Patriots started off okay, but after beating Buffalo, Mac Jones forgot how to play football. Then we put Bailey Zappi in. He was able to win a couple of games, but honestly, we just need to completely reset everything, reset our entire offense, reset everything except for maybe our defensive players, and just hopefully either get Marvin Harrison Jr. or a quarterback in this upcoming draft. Moving on to bad, we have the Arizona Cardinals at 28, the Jets at 27, the Titans at 26, and the Falcons at 25. I do kind of, it does feel kind of wrong to have the Cardinals at 28, with Kyler Murray as their quarterback at the end of the season, but for most of the season, Kyler Murray wasn't playing. I think that the Cardinals do have a better team with Kyler than the Jets have with Trevor Siemian, but 3 games is a big ask to make up a difference for the power ranking. So I'm keeping the Jets at 27. The Jets did lose 2 spots this week, even though they did win against the Patriots, but that's just because Tennessee moved up and the Giants also moved up. So 2 teams moved above them, and a win over the Patriots doesn't really count for anything. They did end up losing 2 spots, but this is more of a season evaluation as opposed to a single week change. The Titans gained 1 spot this week for their win over Jacksonville, kicking them out of the playoffs. It was a good, hard-fought win, and Tennessee did show some glimpses of their former good seasons, but 6 wins after a 7-win season. It looks like Mike Vrabel's going to need a different formula now that Derrick Henry isn't as dominant as he has been in the past. At 25, we have the Falcons. The Falcons lost 1 spot this week for their loss to the Saints. It was a pretty brutal demolition. I almost put the Falcons down at 27, but they had the most respectable season out of any of the teams here. They were the most consistent for most of the year, and they were fighting for the playoffs most seriously for a lot of the season. Moving on to having a valiant effort, we have the Vikings at 24, the Giants at 23, and the Raiders at 22. The Vikings lost 1 spot in this week's power rankings. They lost to the Lions 30-20. Last time they played, they lost 30-24. I used 30-24 again as my prediction for the game in my prediction video, and they ended up losing 30-20. So I think every time that the Lions and the Vikings play each other, that would be the score if it was these 2 teams. The Vikings had a very strong resurgence halfway through the season, but after beating the Raiders 3-0, they just died. They couldn't play football after that. Part of it was because they had a difficult schedule, but they just really had a terrible final stretch of the season. The Giants gained 3 spots this week with their win over the Eagles. The Giants actually had a really valiant effort at the end of the season. They had a really strong finish to the season. Them and the Bears both had very good finishes to the year. They didn't win every game that they played well in, but Tyrod Taylor really pulled out his Tyrod Taylor magic. He brought some good mojo to this team, and they're able to do some pretty decent things towards the end of the year. The Raiders at 22 stayed in the same spot. They got a good win this week over Denver, but Denver also has been up and down this season. The Raiders also had a very respectable season. Aiden O'Connell didn't have the best stats in the world, but he had a pretty good record, pretty good quarterback record for the games that he played. And the Raiders had a pretty respectable season this year. Moving on, we have Derek Carr. The Raiders also could very well be in this category. We have the Bears at 21, the Broncos at 20, and the Saints at 19. This category is meant to just represent teams that are definitionally mid. Teams that have quarterbacks that are definitionally mid. Teams that are this close to being good every single year without quite being good. The Bears had a really strong finish to the season. They did lose in this last week to the Packers, but they really turned it up. Justin Fields had a really strong end of the year, and I can definitely see the Bears being a contender in the NFC North next year if they can pick up some defensive pieces, because their offense, like the end of last season, did look good towards the end of the year. The Broncos lost 4 spots this week. The Broncos shot up the power rankings after their win streak halfway through the season, but same with the Vikings. Right after their win streak, they plummeted, and they plummeted hard. Denver did not look like the same team. Coming after the Vikings win, after they beat the Vikings, they looked like a completely different team the rest of the season. They couldn't get anything going, and then last week they took out Russell Wilson as their starting quarterback just to try something different to see if anything would happen. And the Broncos just did not have a great second half. I think 20 is a fair spot. I can't really picture putting them below the Raiders or the Bears, but I think that 20 is pretty fair. As for the Saints at 19, I put them up 2 spots this week for their win over the Falcons. It was a very strong win. It was a very high-scoring game, and they put up a lot of points without Alvin Kamara. I would have put them another spot higher, but they've just been the most inconsistent team in the league this season. And they did have some good defensive points, but for the most part, I think that the Alvin Kamara suspension at the beginning of the season gave them a slow start, and then halfway through the season they did have a couple of hiccups, but overall it was a decent year. Moving on to some more wildly inconsistent teams, we have the Jaguars at 18, the Colts at 17, the Bengals at 16, and the Packers at 15. The Packers are the lowest playoff team in the power rankings this week. They gained 3 spots for their win over the Bears. Very strong win to clinch their spot in the playoffs. And then the Bengals at 16 also gained 3 spots for their win over the Browns. I know that the Browns were not playing Joe Flacco, so it's a questionable whether or not that game counts for a whole lot. But I do think that the Bengals were a slightly more consistent team than the Colts for most of the year. The Colts finished off strong. I had them stay at 17 where they were, and then Jacksonville lost, obviously, to the Titans. The Colts won 6 of their last 9 games this year, which is a pretty good way to finish off. And although they did finish off with a loss, which is the reason why the Bengals jumped over them, they had a very strong season. Gardner Minshew brought back the Minshew mania, and the Colts were an exciting team to watch this year. The Jaguars copied the Tennessee Titans from last season. The Titans started 7-3 last year, and they finished 7-10. This year, the Jaguars started 8-3, and they finished 9-8. So Jacksonville did the same thing Tennessee did last year. Very poor end of the season. The only game that they won was without Trevor Lawrence because they were playing the Panthers, and beating the Panthers doesn't really count, just the same way beating the Patriots doesn't count. Jacksonville's been one of the worst teams in the league for almost the entire second half of the season, and they just have not been playing well. The Bengals and the Packers obviously both were fighting for playoff spots. The Packers did end up getting theirs, and Jordan Love has had a phenomenal rookie season. First season as a starter. He has stepped up to the plate and bringing the Packers back to the playoffs after losing Aaron Rodgers in a season where they didn't make the playoffs last year is a very impressive thing to do, and Jordan Love did a great job with the team this year. Moving on to playoff caliber in 2023, we have the Buccaneers at 14, we have the Seahawks at 13, we have the Steelers at 12, and we have the Eagles at 11. Tampa did win their division with their win over the Panthers this week, securing it. Baker Mayfield has been very inconsistent this year, but they were able to get it done. And Tampa looks like they have a team that could potentially beat the Eagles. I don't think that they have a huge future this year in the playoffs, but I do think that they could get a game over the Eagles. They could get a game over anyone because Baker Mayfield has been so good in some games. Baker Mayfield could go off and have a phenomenal game any given week, but I don't think that they have a consistent formula to win more than 1 or 2 playoff games. As for the Seahawks at 13, I did keep the Seahawks above the Buccaneers just because I think that Seattle has a better team. They just had a more difficult schedule than the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers had arguably the easiest schedule in the league, or at least one of the easiest schedules in the league. The easiest probably goes to either the Saints or the Falcons. But having one of the easiest schedules in the league versus Seattle, who had a gauntlet of a division and had probably one of the harder schedules in the league, playing their division as well as the NFC East, had a really hard year, and they did pretty well with their schedule. They had a lot of games they lost in the middle of the season in a row, but I think that Seattle was a more consistent team than the Buccaneers this year. And they were above them before last week, and they both won this week. As for the Steelers, they did get a win this week over the Ravens, but it was a ticky-tacky. It was kind of a non-existent game considering Tyler Huntley was the quarterback, so I had them stay at 12. And the Eagles lost 2 spots this week down to 11 with their loss to the Giants. I was very tempted to put the Eagles at 12. I was tempted to put the Eagles at 13. The Eagles have lost 5 of their last 6 games. Their only win is against the Giants in that time frame, and they have losses to the Giants and the Cardinals in that time frame, and the Seahawks. The reason why I'm keeping them at 11 above the other teams here is just because they did have a lot of strong wins in the first half of the season. Seattle and Tampa didn't have as many strong wins as the Eagles did, and the Steelers have had a lot of strong wins, but the Steelers just have the weirdest team in NFL history this year. So I'm keeping the Eagles at 11. I think that there's an argument to be made that could be lower, but I think 11 is fair because they did have a strong start to the season. Jalen Hurts hasn't had a terrible year. They just need to figure out some of their defensive woes. Hopefully by next week, or else they could be out in the first round. Moving on, we have the playoffs. These teams are all in the playoffs. There's not really a whole lot else to describe them. We have the Chiefs at 10, we have the Texans at 9, the Dolphins at 8, the Rams at 7, and the Lions at 6. Kansas City has just been underwhelming this year. They haven't looked like Kansas City. Patrick Mahomes hasn't looked like Patrick Mahomes. And overall, the Kansas City Chiefs have been a pretty average to below average playoff team this year. They've had some good wins, but generally speaking, they've been unremarkable. This week, they did finish off with a win over the Chargers with their backup quarterback in. But they just kind of stayed in the same spot because that game was kind of meaningless anyways. Texans are at 9. They gained 2 spots this week with a strong win over the Colts. CJ Stroud being back has bumped the Texans back up the rankings. I think they're down as low as 14 or 15 with CJ Stroud out, but now that he's back in and winning games with them, they've been gaining spots every single week he's been back. They gained 2 spots this week. I do think that the Texans have a better team than Kansas City does with CJ Stroud in the lineup. Their offense is more explosive. Their offense is just better in general. And neither of these teams have very great defenses this year, but Houston has been a more consistent team with CJ Stroud. Miami's at 8. They lost 3 spots this week with their loss to the Bills. Miami is one of those teams that they look really good, and they look like they could beat anyone, but they just haven't been able to win against good teams. They did beat Dallas by 2, but outside of that Dallas game, they lost to the Bills twice. They got demolished by them in their first matchup. They lost to Kansas City. They lost to the Eagles, and they lost to they got demolished by the Ravens. They lost 4 or 5. They lost 5 games against other playoff teams, and they won 1 game by 2 points. Miami just doesn't look like a team that's competing for a championship right now. The Rams are at 7, and the Lions are at 6. These 2 teams I am a little bit biased towards, I might say, but they are just so much fun to watch. offensive football at its peak in the league right now. The Lions have been explosive this year with their backfield of Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. And then Jared Goff's connection with Amon-Ra St. Brown has just been, and Sam Laporta. That group of players has just been so phenomenal to watch this year. The Lions have been very exciting. This category could just be called Jared Goff. Because we got the Rams, we got the Lions, we got the Chiefs, his arch rival early on in his career. This is an exciting group for the Lions, and they don't really have a good defense, so it's more fun. And then the Rams, their opponent in the wild card round, got their win this week to move up to 10-7 against the 49ers with their backup quarterback Sam Darnold in. And the Rams have had arguably the most explosive offense in the league while Kyren Williams has been playing. Obviously this week they were playing their backups and everything, but when Kyren Williams is playing and they're fighting for something, this team scores 35 points a game. They started off 3-3 before his injury, but while he was injured they went 1-3. Since then they finished 6-1. And they beat the Browns 36-20 something. Like, the Rams have had a really phenomenal second half of the season. And with Kyren Williams in the lineup, they're 9-4. They just look like a powerhouse team that's going to be really tough to beat in the playoffs. The only reason why they're not higher is just because their record isn't the best record in the league and they don't have the best defense ever. But I'm really excited to see what this team does in the playoffs this year. Moving on to the strong contenders, obviously the Lions or the Rams could be in this category, but I capped it at Dallas. We have Dallas at 5, we have the Browns at 4, we have Buffalo at 3, and we have the 49ers at 2. Dallas gained 1 spot this week, moving above Miami, as Miami dropped 3 places, up to number 5. Not much to be said about their game this week, but overall Dallas has had a good season. They've demolished a lot of bad teams, and they've had some close games against a lot of good teams. It's been an up and down year for them, but ultimately Dallas has had a really solid season, and they look like they have a team, especially with how CeeDee Lamb and Dak have been playing in the second half of the season. There's a reason why Dak was getting MVP nods until the 49ers game. Like, there's a reason why Dak was getting all of the attention that he got this year. They've had a great season, and Dallas looks like they are contenders for this year's Super Bowl. The Browns are at 4. They lost 1 spot this week, not because they lost their game, because their game didn't really count for anything, but just because Buffalo moved up. I had the Browns at 3 last week, which was a little ambitious, I will say. It was a little ambitious, but Joe Flacco has been phenomenal with this team. And while they have a competent quarterback, this team is 8-2. Like, they're 4-4 without a competent quarterback. They're 8-2 with a competent quarterback. So it's been a good year for the Browns. And with Joe Flacco at quarterback position, I think that they will be a force to be reckoned with in the playoffs. The Bills are at 3, and the 49ers are at 2. Buffalo gained 1 spot this week up to number 3. I thought that it was audacious to have the Bills at 4 last week. I've had them at 4 for a couple weeks in a row now, actually. But I did think that it was a little bit premature. But that being said, with their win over Miami this week, the Bills have a very impressive resume for a team with 11 wins. 11 wins isn't bad. 11-6 is not bad by any measure, but it's very close to 10-6. But that being said, they have a very strong resume. They beat Miami twice. They beat Kansas City. They had another strong game early on in the season. More recently. I forgot which team that they beat, but they beat another strong team recently. Oh, they beat Dallas. And then their only loss to a good team was their Eagles game, which they lost by 3 points in overtime. The Bills have been a phenomenal team all season. Josh Allen's interceptions are their only inconsistency. And finally, at number 2, we have the 49ers. Their game didn't really count for much this week. They've been dominant all year. Last but certainly not least, we have the NFL's elite. I put the Ravens in their own category last week, and I'm keeping them in here this week. Obviously, they lost this week, but this game didn't really mean anything. Baltimore is the best team in the league. I think it's pretty hard to make an argument against it at this point. I don't think it's close. Obviously, things are going to change in the playoffs. Playoffs, anything can happen. I'm not saying that anything's a lock, anything's a guarantee, but I'd give Baltimore a marginally larger chance of winning the Super Bowl than any other team. Like, they have had a top 5 offense the whole season. Lamar Jackson's an MVP candidate. They just picked up Dalvin Cook. Their running game is phenomenal. They have so many wide receivers just coming out of the woodwork, and they have the best defense in the league. And it's not close. So, Baltimore's number 1. Their game this week didn't really mean a whole lot, but I'm very excited to see what this team does in the playoffs. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the video if you subscribe to the channel if you're new. And I'll see you guys all in my playoff prediction videos later on this week. Peace.